Hey there, hi there, ho there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are coming at us from around the world. And if you're like our guest, Jackie Dujmovic in Australia, it's midnight there. So we really appreciate Jackie and her willingness to, to be a trooper and stick it out with us here, midnight in Australia, just morning here in Colorado. So welcome back to the Drones at Dawn podcast. I'm Dawn Zoldi, your hostess, and we are rounding out the month of May with our global regulatory tour. And what a month it has been. I mean, we talked to Canada and not today Australia, but Africa, South America, Europe. I mean, it's just been amazing. And no better country to end this on. And we're going to have to do this again, because obviously there are parts of this world that we have not hit by any means. But Australia is doing amazing things in the drone world. And a person that is on the cutting edge of this is our guest, Jackie. She's also, by the way, a Woman to Watch award recipient from the year 2018. She received that award for her conservation work. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. And she's the CEO of Hover UAV. And we're going to talk about that as well. So welcome, Jackie. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Dawn. It's a pleasure to be on. And also hi to everyone that's watching live at the moment.
Awesome. And thank you also for saying that, Jackie, because just a reminder, everybody, this is obviously live. So go ahead and drop your questions in the chat, your comments, your positive encouragement for me and Jackie. We love to see that. So definitely jump on in there. And, today is Memorial Day in the United States, and I would really be remiss if I did not just acknowledge that today we remember the men and women who have given the ultimate sacrifice for our country. As you know, I think most of you know, I'm a retired United States Air Force veteran, and this day is kind of a somber day for many of us, but we're pressing on here at Drones at Dawn. And if you're not here live, hopefully folks will come back in and watch this later, because this is going to be some great stuff. So without further ado, let's just jump in, Jackie. Tell us about yourself and how you even got into drones in the first place.
So it's an interesting story how I got into drones. So it was about 7 years ago now, when I first started my life of drones. Prior to that, I actually worked in the maritime industry. So I spent many years traveling the world on super yachts. So I was based out of Europe and the Florida and down to the Bahamas and through the South Pacific. So I spent many years doing engineering, navigational watches, working for the richest people in the world. It was when I became pregnant with my first child, I decided, I don't think I can stay at sea anymore. So I moved back to Australia. And at that time, I started trying to come up with new ideas for a second career. And drones is what I picked. So for me, this is a second career.
So right off the bat, you mixed drones and your maritime background from the start. Tell us about some of the work you did in conservation with whales and sharks.
Yeah, look, my very first few months, like many of you listening, probably said, we're going to start a drone company and we're going to do everything. We're going to do surveying and we're going to do photography and we're going to do just everything. It was a few months later that I actually went to our local business centre and got some advice. And they said, look, you should really always work to your strengths and become an expert in one area of that industry. And once you're an expert, everyone will come to you for everything. So I actually went away and redeveloped my website and everything at that time and go, right, I've got such a maritime background. How do I connect them? We went out and took lots of photos. And it was one of our video footage that caught the attention of our New South Wales, like part of the Australian government, when we took photos of great white sharks. And they're going, wow, like drone technology we can actually use to spot sharks. So we were quite involved for the first few years in all the government shark trials. During that time, we created great processes and procedures, which are now used every day by our lifeguards. I was also fortunate enough to come up with some of the solutions that they're using. So a shark alarm that was placed onto the drone to automatically warn the swimmers when there was a shark. and also some of the life raft drops. So we worked with coming up with those procedures on how all the dropping a life raft to rescue people came about.
You know, I was smiling because I'm hearkening back to last Thursday. So for those of us that weren't on there, for those of you that weren't there, Jackie joined us on Clubhouse, which is the drop-in audio chat, and it was 3 a.m. for her, and we talked about the shark spotting, if you will, and then the lifeguard concept of operations, where not only are they using the drones to spot the sharks and alarm, but as Jackie just said, to drop these life rafts to people. And Jackie, you gave me a statistic that I wasn't aware of. I think is really interesting, the fact that most people drown in the first couple minutes because they panic, thinking no one knows they're there. And this idea that a drone can be overhead and it can actually deliver a life raft, I imagine just the fact that it's there is actually saving lives as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. We've had cases where that's exactly happened, where we've seen swimmers in distress, and we've followed them with the drone and the sensors and everything on them, and then after the first responders come up to us and say, no, you've actually saved them by that swimmer knowing you were there. They didn't panic, and then they didn't drown.
I mean, just absolutely incredible, the work that you have been doing, that you continue to do. So let's talk a little bit about the Australian regulations that enable these kind of operations that you're talking about. So I like to assume when we have these talks that the listeners may not know a lot about Australian drone regulations at all. So some are from the United States, some are global, you know, so, you know, I try to maybe compare, contrast a little bit. I believe you guys use somewhat of the European, Canadian model, the JARUS, SORA, and you have actually 3 categories of drone operations. Can you walk us a little bit through what those 3 categories are? Because I think in every country it's a little different. And I remember listening to you last Thursday, and you had a unique category in there. So can you explain what your 3 categories are?
Yeah, definitely. So we have the recreational users. That one's quite self-explanatory. We then have a category called excluded operations. This was introduced, I guess, to enhance the drone technology for those small UAS. So the less than 2 kilogram drones, or if you're operating on your own land, up to 25 kilograms. So you can do under 2 kilos commercially. And at that time, it's very basic licensing. So they just need an accreditation with our regulator, and they need to make sure their drones are registered to be then able to be operate. They do need to adhere to standard operating conditions, which is probably similar to most countries around the world. They need to stay 30 meters from people. They can't fly at night. They can't fly in fog or rain. They can't fly beyond visual line of sight, or any additional approvals they can't do. The third category we have is a remote operator's certificate. And that's the ones that really want to make an industry or use it as part of their business. So the company actually applies for a remote operation certificate, and then we can hire licensed remote pilots to work under that. At that time, we can then work outside those standard operating conditions. We can start working with highly autonomous drones beyond visual line of sight, flying at night, and all the different approvals that we do require.
So this excluded category, the middle category that you spoke to, so are commercial operators working in that category? And if so, what are the requirements? Do you have to pass a test? Is there training? Do you have to register the drone?
Yeah, so it's very basic training. It's questions that our regulators set on their website. I think it's 10 basic questions about the standard operating conditions. They do have to register the drones. At the moment, it's free until July, and then it does move to $40 per drone per year. So they will have to do that. And they do have to just do basic record keeping. They need to log at the end of the day if their drone had a defect, and things like that. The companies that are taking it up, look, at first, I think the regulator brought it in for, real estate photographers or people that just wanted to do some work, but maybe not make a full career out of it. But a lot of other companies have taken it up. There's mine sites operating. That surf lifesaving program I was talking about, often they run under the excluded category operations. So I think there's like 20,000 operators operating like that. So it's quite a large amount of operators in Australia operating in the excluded category. Also farmers. It's a great option for farmers. They're operating over their own land usually. So it's a great way that they can get in there without that initial cost.
It almost sounds like a basic Part 107 for us, whereas your, I think you called it the remote operator certificate, is much more robust. So tell me about that, because if you receive the remote operator certificate, do you automatically get to use beyond visual line of sight? And if so, do BVLOS operations? And if so, what are the additional requirements before you can get that remote operator certificate then?
No, so the remote operation, you apply through our regulator or a delegate to get that certificate. So they look at that chief, you do an operations manual. So how you're going to operate, how you're going to manage staff, how you're going to manage your record keeping and things like that. You then assign a chief remote pilot to be responsible for the operations and a maintenance controller. You only get the standard operating conditions or what you originally put in your manual. From there, if you want to apply for anything else, be it night, extended visual line of sight or beyond visual line of sight, you have to take additional measures. Most measures are usually just writing the procedures. So if you're operating at night, well, how are you going to manage that like interaction with air traffic, or how are you going to see your drone? So by adding additional light. So writing those procedures. BVLOS is a little bit different. Did you want me to go into BVLOS now, Dawn?
Yeah, I'd love to talk. First of all, we didn't even talk about Hover UAV in your company. And I know you guys have a BVLOS hub that you put together to help people obtain BVLOS approvals. So tell us about Hover UAV, what you all are doing, and specifically about your BVLOS hub, and then, what BVLOS looks like in Australia.
Yeah. Of course. So it was actually when we were working on that Shark project and a few others, we realized there was so many amazing entrepreneurs and inventors out there but a lot of the blockages were happening with the regulations or them trying to build a sustainable business model. So that's where we really converted what we do to help those companies. So we started writing those safety cases for them, and we created the Beyond Visual Line of Sight Hub. So it's a place where people can come and learn about Beyond Visual Line of Sight. The SORA training, which is our, I'm sure we're going to probably go into that soon, but it's our methodology that our regulator used to work out the risk for that beyond visual line of sight. We actually created a beyond visual line of sight course as well. We noticed that our remote pilots training didn't really go into that next level. So it's a training that talks about the C2 links and how to plan for a beyond visual line of sight and things like that. We've also just got through a remote operations centre. So it's allowing us to operate from the comfort of our lovely office, but operate drones in other parts of Australia. So by using like drone-in-the-box solutions, such as the Percepto system, we can then fly that from our office as well, which is amazing.
That is amazing. I mean, again, I mentioned I was in the Air Force. I mean, the United States military, and I'm sure the Australian, in fact, I know the Australian military as well, because I know some of the judge advocates in your service there have been flying those kind of remote operations for years and years and years. And I think that is definitely the next level of commercial operations, exactly what you're doing, Jackie, having a remote operations center, because it works. It's tried and true. The military's been doing it for years. So tell us about the beyond visual line of sight. I know there's almost like different levels, I'll call it, in Australia. Explain kind of what those are.
So usually, look, let's just say you're a client and you're coming to me and you have a concept of operation. So we usually look at what you want to do, what you want to achieve, and we work out the best way. So there's usually 3 options we can go down. We have extended visual line of sight, which still does fall in the beyond visual line of sight category, but you're using visual observers, similar to what a lot of the beyond visual line of sight operations are in the US. Then we have our beyond visual line of sight standard scenarios. So CASA did just release to consultation 5 new scenarios. Now, they've done a lot of the hard work for you, and they've actually created the risk assessments and have given guidance on what procedures should look like and what your KML files and all of your application for that safety case if they fall into those scenarios. The scenarios were based on what common applications we were starting to see in Australia that still weren't too complicated. So we obviously have a lot of agriculture and mining and resources in Australia. So a lot of those were, within 100 foot of a structure or very remote and rural airspace for the agriculture. So we've got the standard scenarios, and then we also can do the full SORA. So if you're doing something that's outside the standard or a little bit more complex, it could be drone delivery, or you need to fly more closer to a city and things like that, then you would fall under that full SORA pathway.
So you're using the term SORA, and again, not everybody's going to know what that is.
Okay.
You and I have talked about it a little bit. So the JARIS, the joint, you can say the acronym better.
Yeah. It's the Joint Association of Rulemaking for Unmanned Systems. So it's 62 countries around the world have joined together and created a set of rules. Each regulator does not need to follow to the exact letter of the law of what JARIS create, but it's a guidance. So CASA have obviously adapted it to what they believe is suitable. And the SORA, which we keep saying, is a specific operation risk assessment. So it's a bow tie risk assessment for those that know risk assessments. And then we break down, break it all down. It's over 10 steps. We look at the air risk, the ground risk, and then we get what risk that it's going to be. So it might be 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. And then from that, we'll work out what safety objectives we need to follow for that operation. So what, what we need to put on the drone, what training the crew will be required and things like that. So it helps with that process.
I think it's really beautiful that this risk-based assessment lends itself to these standard scenarios that you just mentioned, because we're doing a lot of research and development in the United States. We had the integrated pilot program, the integration pilot program, the IPP, which is now the Beyond program, and they're focusing on, in large part, beyond visual line of sight. And the approvals we're seeing are typically in the context of this research kind of ecosystem environment. The fact that you all are actually doing it is, to me, absolutely phenomenal. And the fact that you've already called out, like, hey, here's some common uses where the risk is low enough that we can just say, if you meet this criteria, you're good to go. That's amazing. So you mentioned mining, you mentioned some remote, and I'll say remote as in far away from people, maybe in the outback or something like that. What other kind of common scenarios are you seeing? You said there's 5 that your aviation authority has approved.
Yeah, look, the three first ones were based near a structure, so great for power line inspection. So there needed to be what we're calling atypical airspace. So airspace that we don't expect any manned aviation to be. So within 100 foot vertically of a structure or 400 foot horizontally. So that's great for building inspections, as I said, power lines and things like that. So they've broken that to 3 different ground risks. So they've broken that down into like a very rural sort of area, a sparsely populated and a more populated ground environment, because each of those have different risks you have to to achieve. Like you have to prove that you can get past that risk. Yeah, exactly. The other ones are based near 3 nautical miles from an aerodrome. A lot of our mining operations and our rural farms, our large farms, do have helicopter sites and landing strips and things like that. So we had done one that was, they did one that was quite useful for those sort of operations as well. And the last one was for any operations below 5,000 feet for very remote Australian airspace. So Australia did create, you know how I said that people could
I know, I'm laughing again
flora?
because no, I'd interviewed you before, Jackie, for Inside Unmanned Systems magazine. By the way, everybody out there, if you haven't read my article, it's on my website. It's called Getting the Nods North and South. And it's about Canada and Australia. And Jackie was featured in that piece. And I had no idea until Thursday that you guys created your own category of airspace. So tell us about that.
Yeah, look, I mean, Australia is a very vast country, and the airspace out in the middle of Australia is so, the risk and the encounter level is so low that they created, the SORA has to a certain number, and they created 2 extra spaces because that risk was more like atypical airspace. That it was the same ratio that we don't expect any air traffic to be. So that has been a great opportunity for test sites for beyond visual line of sight, or for people to obtain their first beyond visual line of sight approval to gain that the regulators' trust as they move closer towards the city as well. So that's why I think we have attracted a lot of international clients come to Australia to do some of their beyond visual line of sight testing.
Yeah, in fact, I think I don't know if that magazine's out or not. My latest for Inside, it is out for Inside Unmanned. It's about critical infrastructure. I think I called it like send in the drone centurions or something, because there's a company called Department 13. They're out there. They're actually using drones to protect critical infrastructure in Australia, and almost like sentries, right? Like kind of patrolling the airspace using remote operations like you talked about. So yeah, that's something that we're not really able to do here in the United States very well. And so I have BVLOS envy of Australia, to be sure. Now we had talked about some areas where, you all, the regulators are still working on it, whether it's, I think remote identification is one of those areas, and unmanned traffic management both, and they're somewhat linked. Is that something that's kind of a work in progress in Australia?
Yeah, I think like many parts around the world, it is a work in progress. We're probably a little bit behind on the remote ID. That sort of, our registration has taken a while to get through. I think there was a lot of disagreements on how much we should all pay for registration. So we've only sort of seen at the moment the commercial operators and the excluded operators needing to register their drones. The recreational have not needed to do that yet. So I think remote ID will come along shortly, but in conjunction with that. For unmanned traffic management, it's definitely a hot topic here in Australia, and like our air services and all our regulators are throwing out requests for information and different tenders all the time. I think there's been numerous come out over the last 4 months. The government has also, our Department of Infrastructure did just release a national emerging aviation policy. Now, if anyone is, I'm not sure I can see everyone's comments, but it'd be great to actually know what your interest is in Australia, if you're interested in coming out and flying, or it's just general interest as well, if you put in your comments. But for those coming to Australia, it's a definite worth the read. So it's how we're going to progress over the next few years. And it's that policy guideline. So it states that our regulator needs to come up with a regulatory roadmap over the next few years, which is going to be fantastic for us all to say, we expect larger RPA to have regulations in place by this time. It also discussed things that's never been a real, it's never been locked in. It's always been talk, yes, you've got to do this, but nothing's been locked in, like on noise and privacy and security and different elements that goes along with drone operations. So that policy also addresses a lot of those.
Yeah, I love that your high level policymakers are thinking about these issues and talking about them like
Mhm.
privacy. I mean, so just to back up a second, obviously our regulators, the Federal Aviation Administration, you've mentioned yours, CASA. Can you explain what CASA is and what it does?
Yeah, it's a civil aviation safety authority for Australia. So they regulate the safety and a lot of our regulations for aviation in general. There's Department of Infrastructure. They sort of oversee that, and they're getting more involved with that future framework, along with different places like air services and that. So delivering and coming up with the FIMS and how all of that back end is going to work for our future traffic management, for example, and who's going to get priority in the airways, and how all of that back end is going to work.
I love in a way that you all have moved out on things like beyond visual line of sight, while the regulators are still kind of figuring out amongst themselves who's doing what. And you guys are just doing operations, and I think that's a beautiful thing. We see that a little bit in the UK. I know there's a group called Drone Major, and they've got like these Phoenix projects across the country, including they've automated the entire port of Liverpool, and they're just doing it. And they invited the regulators to the table, like, hey, come on along for the ride, and you can see how we're actually making this happen.
Look, I mean, we've had some great pioneers into Australia, like Wing. They did fantastic pushing boundaries for the rest of Australia. So they sort of came in, and obviously that SOAR methodology came along with that, but they pushed the boundaries to, do drone delivery over people and things like that, which is really, you need those companies to come in and to push the industry like further forward each time, because it allows a lot of other organizations, including some of myself and some of our clients, to sort of follow through as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. And we do have, and I'm going to butcher your name, so I'm sorry right up front, Ayadel. Yeah, says hello, everyone. So I don't know where you're coming from, Ayadel, but very pleased to have you here with us today. So thanks so much for joining in. All right, so just a couple more things on the regulatory front, and then maybe we'll just kind of wrap it up a little bit here. You mentioned operations over people and night operations. That's something that in the United States, we, for whatever reason, lumped into one rule that just came out in January. Still working through some of the specifics on pieces and parts of that. But can you actually you mentioned beyond visual line of sight over people, like that's a thing. You can do that there in Australia.
Look, flying over people is not common at this stage. There's a lot of companies trying. I think the FAA might be a little bit further ahead. I know the Skydio and a few others have had that, the public safety drones, where they've got more options to fly over people. In Australia, we're all trying at the moment. Sometimes the approvals just take a little bit longer. So it's not very common. There's only those select companies that have spent a lot of time to really show that risk of that aircraft coming down is very low. Night is definitely very common. Most commercial operators do have the option to fly at night. As mentioned, all we need to do is write in our procedures on how we're going to train the staff to actually fly at night, and then and also their procedures of what they're going to follow during that night flight as well.
Well, absolutely amazing. And so what's next for you, Jackie, and for Hover? What's your, obviously you have the operations center that you've just created. You've got the BVLOS hub. What's on the horizon for you all?
We just want to help more organizations push those boundaries. We want to see them make it sustainable. So by providing information on compliance, or, providing outsourced staffing, or allowing them to come into our BVLOS hub to learn those next steps. That's sort of what we really want to do for here in Australia and also in other parts of the world. So that's probably what's next for us. For me personally, I have a passion for that drone delivery, and I'm really looking forward to sort of even the large freight sort of commercial delivery as well. So that's probably more my sort of passion at the moment. I really want to sort of focus on that moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's obviously the next wave is what we're calling here advanced air mobility, and probably, like you said, cargo will be the first step, and
exactly,
maybe, manned aircraft that's vertical takeoff lift, maybe electric, those things are several years out, but definitely on the horizon. So
Yeah. They need to come to Australia and trial. We've got remote Australian airspace.
you do. You've got remote Australian airspace, and I'm here in Colorado, and I did an interview with Sally French, the drone girl, and I was talking about we've got a range here that nobody even knows about. It's like absolutely incredible. It's every kind of terrain you can think of, and they have a couple certificates of authorization. They can work with companies to do that here too. So I mean, the airspace is there, right? Like, so let's make these cases happen and, sell it and get the regulators to move forward. These are definitely exciting times. And like I said, you've been just doing amazing work, starting with the sharks and now, with mines and electric tower inspections and everything else you're doing with your hub and your remote op center. So thank you so much for taking the time to kind of walk us through what that system in Australia looks like and how you play into it. Scott Schofman is our super fan. He's out there saying thanks, Jackie and Dawn. So he's out of Texas, and he's doing amazing work with the Drone Service Providers Alliance here and his own company, Quad Access. So any closing comments, Jackie, before we dial out?
No, look, reach out to me if anyone's thinking of coming out here to operate, or look, also happy to collaborate across the globe as well. So no, look forward to sort of everyone reaching out and having further conversations.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, that's why we're doing this, because, I think I posted at some point on LinkedIn, it's a small world after all. It really, really is. And we can learn from each other. The fact that you have BVLOS training that you're doing. I know Volatus is doing that up in Canada. They were also featured in that Inside Unmanned article. And what I heard was, I have not been able to confirm this, but apparently our FAA announced at the end of, what was it? There was just the AUVSI online couple day event where the FAA said, oh, we've put together the BVLOS, advisory rule committee, or the ARC. And I've been asking everybody, like, okay, who's on it? Where's that? Where is it? And I haven't seen anything. But if true, and I assume it would be, that's exciting news, because that means they're thinking about that next step. What does the regulation look like? So you guys already have it in yours. Canada's moving out at the end of the year. So it'd be great to learn the lessons that you all have already learned, and Canada and benefit from that. So thank you so much for leading the way, and for being you, and for joining us at midnight, which now it's almost 12:30. It's the next day for you. So really appreciate it.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, Dawn.
Yeah. And, one thing I want to just put the final plug in. I mean, I know the nomination period's over, but keep an eye out for Women to Watch. I mean, it's a year-long thing. We're going to be announcing those winners this year for our 5th anniversary at Interdrone Live, which is going to be in Texas, the 10th to 12th of August. So hopefully you all can join us, because when you look at the previous award recipients, people like Jackie, you see the amazing things they're doing globally. And, really what a program, and such a privilege to be a part of that. So let me just tell everybody, before we sign off, next week, we dive into advanced air mobility. And we're starting off with Felipe Varon of Varon Vehicles. He is doing some amazing things in Colombia and globally with, flying taxis. So we're going to see how what they're doing exactly there, and what he thinks the future is going to be. We've got a month full of this, lots of different people. Oh, by the way, I'm looking at the calendar here. Not only are we going to talk to Felipe on Monday, but then we're having a special Drones at Dusk podcast the next night, Tuesday the 8th, with our buddies from the Urban Low Altitude Transport Association, or ULTRA, the Jersey boys, and we're going to be talking at night. So I think that's going to be 5 o'clock Eastern on Tuesday. Keep your eyes peeled for that. And backing it up a little bit, this Thursday, hopefully on Clubhouse, we can get Felipe in there, 11 o'clock, drop in audio chat, Drone Law Connection. So meet us there. We'll start talking to Felipe, continue the conversation next Monday. So that's it for now. Thank you again, Jackie. Thank you for everything. And everybody else, happy Memorial Day. Have a wonderful week and hope to hear you on Clubhouse and see you next week. So out here.